Saverio Sam Pollaccia was a powerful figure in Joe the Boss Masseria's organisation. Throughout his criminal career, he'd been good friends with Frankie Yale, a close associate of murdered boss of bosses Salvatore D'Aquila, and rubbed shoulders with the likes of Charlie Luciano and Vito Genovese. So why is Sam Pollaccia rarely talked about? And why was he murdered? Let's check it out. Welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today we're going to talk about mysterious prohibition gangster Saverio Sam Pollaccia. Saverio Sam Pollaccia was born in Sicily in either 1886 or 1887. It is unclear when Pollaccia came to the United States, but ultimately he settled in Brooklyn, where he became close friends with powerful Brooklyn mobster Frankie Yale. The pair both had businesses in Coney Island. Pollaccia had a restaurant on Surf Avenue, and his close pal Frankie Yale famously ran the Harvard Inn, a location etched into our minds as the place where young Al Capone received his famous scars. Sam Pollaccia resided at 1416 66th Street, Brooklyn. In 1924, Frankie Yale, at the behest of his old friend Johnny Torrio, travelled to Chicago to help murder Dion O'Banion, the boss of Torrio's rival gang. Frankie Yale allegedly walked into a flower shop owned by O'Banion, shook him by the hand and then held on tight, while Chicago gunmen John Scalise and Albert Anselmi fired 2 bullets into O'Banion's chest, 2 into his neck, and 2 into his cheeks. However, what is rarely reported is that police at the time believed that Saverio Sam Pollaccia was a suspect in the O'Banion murder. Prominent Italian-American figure Michele Mike Merlo died of cancer in Chicago on November 8, 1924. And Frankie Yale and his friend Saverio Sam Pollaccia travelled to Chicago under the pretense of paying their respects. It is alleged that shortly after arriving, Yale, with possibly Pollaccia in tow, visited Schofield's, a florist run by Dion O'Banion, to put in an order for some flowers for Mike Merlo's funeral. It is believed that in reality, Yale was scoping the location for the planned hit on O'Banion. 2 days after Mike Merlo's death, Frankie Yale, along with John Scalise and Albert Anselmi, who at the time were members of the Jenner gang, walked into O'Banion's florist and executed the North Side gang leader. A week later, an informer told authorities that those responsible for O'Banion's killing would be travelling back to New York. And a few minutes before Frankie Yale and Sam Pollaccia were due to board a train back to New York from LaSalle Street Station, the pair were arrested by the police. Both men were carrying pistols. Various newspapers reported the arrest of the suspected gunman. Chicago, November the 18th. Frank Yale, suspected New York gunman and reported lieutenant of Johnny Torrio, alleged beer runner, and a companion, Sam Pollaccia, also of New York, were seized by the police as suspects in the slaying 10 days ago of Dion O'Banion, gang leader, gunman and hijacker, as the couple were about to board a train for New York City. Further detail on the pair was also revealed. Pollaccia gave its card to Assistant State's Attorneys John Sabarbaro and William McSwiggan. If he were a murderer, would he carry his own cards here where the murder happened? He wanted to know. He, a New York businessman, 4 years owner of a restaurant at Coney Island. Why, it was ridiculous, he insisted. Pollaccia is the father of 3 children, Yale the father of 2, they said, and they gave themselves excellent reputations. New York police gave this record to Chicago authorities. Yale, an undertaker, figured in many crimes in Brooklyn during the last 10 years. Pollaccia has no record, but is known to be a close friend of Yale. Eventually, both Yale and Pollaccia were released by the police, after a conductor acted as an alibi, stating that the pair had not arrived in Chicago until the day after O'Banion's murder. 2 years after the O'Banion slaying, Orazio Trippier, a member of the Jenner gang, was murdered, and when police searched his personal effects, they found an address book that contained 38 names and addresses. 29 were Chicago-based addresses, but only one was from New York City. It was that of Sam Pollaccia. This perhaps indicating that Sam Pollaccia was an important connection between the Jenner gang in Chicago and the mobsters in New York City. As the 1920s progressed, it appears that Frankie Yale and Sam Pollaccia became affiliated with Joe Masseria's growing organisation. However, it is interesting to note that Sam Pollaccia was once also closely aligned with Salvatore Toto D'Aquila, who at the time was considered boss of bosses in New York. Mob historian Tom Jones even states that Toto D'Aquila was the godfather to one of Pollaccia's children, his daughter Rosa. D'Aquila would be gunned down on the Lower East Side in 1928, and after this, Masseria was then considered to be at the top of the New York underworld. By 1930, and with the Castellanese War in full swing, two of Masseria's top men, Mineo and Steve Ferrigno, were gunned down at the Alhambra apartments on Pelham Parkway in the Bronx after a meeting with their boss. Interestingly, but never mentioned, Saverio Sam Pollaccia was also at this meeting. It was reported by the police and the media that he was at the scene. Brilliant mob historian Thomas Hunt hypothesizes that it was perhaps Pollaccia who was the inside man that tipped off Maranzano's gunmen, which according to Joe Valachi included Buster from Chicago, Bobby Doyle Santucci and Nick Capuzzi, with regards to the upcoming meeting with Masseria. Hunt writes, Pollaccia's loyalty toward Masseria during this period is suspect. The fortunes of war had turned against Joe the Boss so suddenly and so completely that betrayal seems likely. Within New York, a string of surprising Maranzano successes against the boss not only removed valuable Masseria men, but also moved Pollaccia gradually upward in the Masseria chain of command. By 1931, the following year, Saverio Sam Pollaccia was firmly embedded as a close advisor to Joe Masseria. And interestingly, it was Pollaccia who was confirmed by the police to have been at the lunch meeting with Masseria and not Charlie Luciano when Joe the Boss was gunned down. This isn't to say that Charlie Luciano wasn't there, but that there were no media or police reports to say that he was. After Masseria's murder, Sam Pollaccia was picked up and interviewed by the police. It was reported, Captains John McGowan and Ray Honan of the Brooklyn Homicide Squad made these disclosures after an all-night grilling of Sam Pollaccia. Pollaccia, 35, who lives at 3428 76th Street, Corona, and says he runs an olive oil business on Mott Street, Manhattan, was picked up at 3 a.m. by detectives Charles Corbett and Louis Dardis of Brooklyn headquarters. One of 3 coats left behind by the 3 men who sat in the fatal card game is said to belong to Pollaccia. Police say he took Joe to the restaurant to talk reason to a Coney Island policy racket backer who curtly had refused to come through with a protection cut to Joe. Whether Pollaccia had any knowledge of the impending hit on his boss can be speculated, and I will cover this famous mob hit in greater detail in a future video. A few months later, some sources say in late 1931, others suggest early 1932, Sam Pollaccia disappeared and was never seen again. However, from the book by longtime mafiosi Nick Gentile, we have some idea of what happened. Gentile wrote in his autobiography that Luciano's underboss, Vito Genovese, went on a trip to Chicago accompanied by Pollaccia. On the way, the pair stopped in Pittsburgh to meet with the city's boss, John Bazzano. It was here that Vito Genovese confided in Bazzano that Pollaccia was to be murdered. Bazzano would later relay this information to Nick Gentile. After the pair had arrived in Chicago, and with the help of future outfit boss Paul Ricca, Pollaccia was murdered and Ricca assisted in the disposal of his corpse. The motive for Saverio Sam Pollaccia's murder can only be speculated. Some suggest that Vito Genovese alone made the decision to kill Pollaccia. Perhaps he felt threatened by Pollaccia's standing in the Luciano family. Others suggest that perhaps Luciano ordered the hit himself, killing off one of the remaining men from Masseria's hierarchy. Unfortunately, there is no clear reason for Pollaccia's murder that can be concluded. Saverio Sam Pollaccia, a once important figure in New York City gangland, left behind a wife and 5 children, and a lot of unanswered questions. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.